these are taxpayer dollars, and they're not my dollars. And just like in our venture business, we had skin in the game too, but over time we were investing other people's money. And you have to have a different lens as you look at things when you're investing other people's money, in this case, taxpayer dollars, And so my antenna goes way up, and my nature is to be, fairly, speculative on, the opportunity. Does it make any sense? I mean, my nature is to go in and think, this is a no until they can convince me this is a yes.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Rutherford County GOP podcast. We're super excited to have with us today Deputy Governor and Commissioner of the Economic and Community Development Department for the state of Tennessee, Stuart McWhorter. Welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, appreciate you guys having me.
Thanks for letting us take over your office.
The title's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Nobody seems to know how to, kind of frame all that right now.
I'm trying to figure out when you go home between being Deputy Governor and Commissioner of ECD. That's
it's a lot
on both ends.
I mean, even saying Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development is a lot to say. So put the Deputy Governor part in there, and it's just a mouthful. Most people kind of don't know what to call me, and I just say just call me Stuart. Maybe that's just easiest.
Well, and you've been around quite a bit in the Lee administration. You've held a few more hats than just those in general too. So
it's been. I've actually really enjoyed this particular position with this department. It's been a fun 3.5 years for me. Serving as F&A Commissioner was probably the best place to start, because you really get a good feel of how state government works and how the budget works, and doing that for 2 cycles, I think is, looking back on it now, that's actually where anyone, if they have the opportunity to do it, should start. At least spend time in the budget and understanding it, because it'll just sort of paint the picture of how state government works. And you get to know all the department heads and agency leaders, and you build relationships along the way.
Yeah. Well, we're excited for this conversation. Appreciate you letting us take over your office this afternoon.
Yeah. So, we got a clear day. It's nice out.
Yeah.
The shade's pulled down for this, but it's grateful to be part of this.
Well, yeah, we just want to kind of dive in and talk about, your background, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah.
And what I really want to hear about, before we dive into how you got to where you're at today, how did you become the mascot of the University of Clemson?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what everybody really wants to know about.
Well, me too. What was I thinking? Maybe it should be the question. But so I grew up in Atlanta, and just north of Atlanta. And the drive between where I grew up in Dunwoody, Georgia, and Clemson is about an hour and 45 minutes. So it's not very far from home. But I went to Clemson, and as a freshman, I joined a fraternity. Well, my big brother in the fraternity, a guy named Martin Lowry. Martin was the mascot. He was the tiger at the time. And I didn't, I knew that he was, but I didn't think much of it.
Yeah.
And one afternoon, I was at the house, and he was walking through the house with this big, massive orange duffel bag around his shoulder. And we were talking. I said, "What do you have in your bag?" He goes, "Well, it's the suit. It's the mascot suit." Like, okay. And I asked what he was doing with it and where he was going. And he said, "I'm on my way to conduct tryouts. We have tryouts for this," which I didn't know either. And I was like, "You have to try out for that?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I was, at the time, I was a pledge in the fraternity. And so I was like, well, I'll go try out. I wanted to get out of whatever I was doing as a pledge. And he was my big brother. I was like, well, here's my way out for my duties that day. So I went down there and I tried out. And
what does a mascot tryout look like?
Well, so it was 2 days of tryouts, and so the first day is a series of skits that you do, and you put the suit on. You spend a few hours just learning the mannerisms of the tiger. It's got a certain swagger and a certain style. You got to know what that is. You can't just get in it and do whatever you want to do. So you have to kind of know what that is. But the rest of the day was doing skits that were, nonverbal. So they're all actions. You have to use big motions. You have to try to tell a story with your motions. And so that's what we did the first day. The second day was an actual tryout, so you had to come back with a planned skit to tell the story to the judges. And that's what, so there's 2 days of a lot of just learning how to the motions. And then they did an interview without the suit on. But I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never done anything like that in my life. And interestingly, as I was in it for those 2 days, I was having a blast.
Yeah.
And it turns out that my big brother, even though he was the Tiger, he had to try out again. Even though he was the incumbent, he had to still get the vote. And I tied him for
the
first
votes.
place. And so we split it. He was a senior and I was a rising sophomore in college. So we got to do it together that 1 year. And then I did it again my junior year and was the sole
So you get
Tiger.
to travel, go to
Yeah,
the
you travel. I went to all the football games, did all the home basketball games, both men's and women's games, and then we traveled for basketball tournaments. And back then, Clemson was actually a pretty good basketball team. Men's team was good. And then we would do home games of baseball and soccer and whatever was. But outside of just athletics, probably 60% of the time in the suit was non-athletic events. So I was at alumni events. I was at other university-related events that were both on campus as well as off campus or in the state, scattered around the state of South Carolina. I would be in the alumni van going to the Watermelon Fest, whatever, and I had to put the suit on and perform. But it was fun. I mean, you met a lot of people, as you can imagine. You meet a lot of people along the way. Not being from South Carolina, I didn't know a whole lot about the state. Certainly didn't know much about the rivalry between the University of South Carolina and Clemson. But
Figured that one out, I guess.
But yeah, we figured it out fast. Learned not to like the Gamecocks very much, but the relationships and you ultimately, when you really think about it and reflect on it, you're the ambassador for the university. You're representing the brand, the paw, and people are watching. I mean, all the kids are watching you, but people watch you, and you have to kind of be thoughtful and mindful about what you're doing. And when you're 19 and 20 and 21 years old, those things don't really come through your brain very, very well. But it was a great experience.
It's interesting because as our organization, professionally, we love to hire athletes because they are really good at time management.
They are, yeah.
And I'm sure being a mascot, having to travel around and then get back and do your studies and be able to manage multiple different irons probably helped you a lot as you kind of moved into your career.
I mean, you learn accountability, responsibility. You learn how to interact with people who are oftentimes twice your age or maybe even more.
Sure.
Around a lot of adults, and around leaders, and you have to learn how to grow up and mature pretty quickly in that regard. And at the time, though, I didn't really know that. I didn't know what it was teaching me. All I was thinking about was, I got to go to the next event, and I got to make sure I got the suit and I got it cleaned. I go pick it up and I go, and I got to be there. But oftentimes, like I said, so much of it was non-athletic away from campus. So I was driving to different places. Sometimes it could be a couple hours away, and sometimes it could be 10 or 15 minutes away. But thankfully, South Carolina is not a huge state, so it wasn't that difficult to do. But it was a lot of life lessons in that experience for sure.
So what was it that drew you specifically to Clemson? You mentioned being from Atlanta. So how did you land at Clemson?
So it was close to home primarily. I didn't really want to go to a state school in Georgia, but I had a cousin that was there. She was 3 or 4 years ahead of me, and she had a great experience. She'd always talked about how much she loved being there, and that was becoming sort of on my radar in high school as I was thinking about where I wanted to go. Sophomore, junior year, I thought Auburn was where I wanted to go. I was a big Auburn fan, still am an Auburn fan, but that's where I thought I was just going to go to school. And I had gone up a few times to campus at Clemson, and there was just something about it that I just felt like this is the place for me. Yeah. And at the last second, decided to go to Clemson versus Auburn. Interestingly, Auburn I got admitted to Clemson for the fall, for my freshman year. But at Auburn, they wanted me to go to summer school and take summer classes before the fall, and I was like, I'm not ready for that. So I want to stay home this summer and have one last summer with my buddies. So that was part of the decision, believe it or not. Auburn really didn't let me in. Clemson did, so I was like, well, that's my deciding factor, my tiebreaker. I'm gonna go there, and it was the best decision I made, honestly.
So fast forwarding a little bit, your father's in healthcare for HCA.
Correct.
And kind of thinking about following Dad's footsteps, which is, I think, maybe secretly what a lot of fathers hope they can be a role model,
That's
and
right.
their kids want to follow in their footsteps. And so you kind of pursued that path for a little bit.
I did.
Healthcare in Nashville is probably one of our biggest industries, if not our biggest industry. It has been, and HCA is the reason that a lot of those healthcare businesses are here. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So growing up, my parents divorced when I was young, about 9 or 10 years old. They divorced. We stayed in Atlanta. My dad was in Atlanta for a period of time. He was with HCA, and they had a regional office in Atlanta. And then Dr. Frist, promoted him to Nashville, and he moved up here when I was, young. And so my summers and holiday time was spent up here in Nashville for an extended period of time. So Dad would always take me to the office and to the One Park Plaza. And I would hang out there as a kid and hang around in Centennial Park and do the things. And occasionally we'd get out and do stuff around town. But he worked so much, that's where I spent a lot of time. And there was just something about the HCA family that I loved. I mean, it was all the people that are, many are still alive today that were part of that experience for me. And what I saw in all that were great people who cared deeply about their jobs and the mission of HCA, but they all had fun. And I thought, well, my dad's having fun. And, as I was growing up thinking about what I wanted to do in my career, I just kept reflecting on the fact that he really enjoys what he does, and he's doing something that makes a difference. And so that's what my pursuit was. Post Clemson, I went to University of Alabama, Birmingham, got a master's in hospital administration. I worked in Birmingham for a number of years with, interestingly, a competitor hospital to HCA. But after doing that for several years, I ended up moving here and decided not to pursue that path in hospital administration. But because of growing up around it and just seeing how much, he enjoyed it, really was the reason I went in that direction early on in my career.
So you go from that to more of a private equity capital markets type business that you went in with your father, correct?
We did, yeah, we did it together. So, I moved up here, and so after Birmingham, I moved to Nashville, really without a job. I just knew that I didn't want to stay in Birmingham any longer with what I was doing with the hospital. They had offered me a more permanent position in administration, which I knew was going to require, a commitment for me. And I just didn't feel like I wanted to be in Birmingham. So I moved here, and we started, I was involved in a startup company called OrthoLink Physicians Corporation. And it was with TOA here. Dave Alexander, Dr. Dave, was the founder. And it was really a business that was really coming together with other large orthopedic group practices around the country to help consolidate some back office and look at how they could explore other ancillary revenue opportunities, as a larger group. And during that time, Dad was at HCA as chairman of the company. So rewinding the tape just quickly, he was at HCA. He spun out Health Trust from HCA. He spun out the rural hospitals that HCA owned, and they named it Health Trust. Health Trust went public, and then later merged back with HCA. So he was at HCA, spins Health Trust out, has a great success turning a lot of rural hospitals into great community hospitals, and then goes public, and then they merge it all back together. And that was when it was called Columbia HCA. It merged with Columbia Healthcare out of Kentucky, out of Louisville, Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And they merged it. And interestingly, I've told this story before, but there was a debate and quite frankly, a competition for where HCA would be headquartered in that merger. Was it going to be Nashville or was it going to be Louisville? And a lot of things happened, but it obviously
and
stayed.
Louisville's a very competitive hospital market. We've done some business up there.
You got Humana up there. You've got a lot of major players up there, but thankfully, it stayed here. And think about what Nashville would be like if they didn't have HCA.
Yeah.
And so Dad was part of all of those things. And once all that, the dust settled on the merger, Dad was chairman. Rick Scott, everybody knows Rick Scott, was the CEO of the company. And Dad felt like it was time for him to leave. He said, I've done what I'm going to do. And it's time for me to get out of this. So he retired from HCA, and literally the next day, we sat around a table about this size, myself, my dad, and a couple other folks, and we created Clayton Associates. And what that was really set out to do in his mind was, I'm retiring here, I'm going to leave HCA, but at that time he was in his early 60s. I've still got a lot of gas in the tank. I'm not done. I'm not going to retire, but I'm going to leave this to do something new and different, and we're going to invest in people that I know who understand healthcare. I'm willing to put my own personal money behind these folks and bet on them, and that's what we're going to do, and that's how we started it. None of us had any experience doing deals, but he especially had obviously a very deep knowledge of healthcare and had relationships in that. So that launched into what became, 20 years of venture capital investing that he and I did. And we, over time, created different funds to address, how we would invest those dollars. These were our dollars, family dollars. And then over time, we started having other people that wanted to invest alongside with us. And it was a great run. We had a lot of misses, but we had a handful of really good projects and companies we invested in that kept it going. Made money for our investors, learned a lot along the way, and the funds that we created as a result of that are still in operation today. I'm not involved anymore in those, but they still live and have my dad's legacy still attached to all of those things that they're still doing today in healthcare. It's kind of cool to be a part of, creating that environment here in Nashville. And, back then there weren't many healthcare venture funds. You could count on, one hand how many were doing it at that time. And today, there's a lot. And
what's interesting about that, I think it's funny how God kind of puts us through these different seasons of our lives to kind of prepare us for something down the line. And I've heard you talk about, having to sit down and evaluate a person that you're maybe going to lend money, invest in.
That's right.
And just, is this a person that is the right character? Is the person we're going to get along with? Are they going to be successful? All these different things, which is interesting because you're doing a lot of that now for the state.
Right.
And you're also evaluating the company and the plan and is it a good fit?
That's right.
And so kind of talk to us a little bit about that, how you develop that over time. Because certainly, the thing about it is, I think that's interesting is you said, not all of them were wins, which sometimes your most valuable lessons come from losses. But kind of talk to us about that process and how that's kind of helped you develop.
I think to your point, the best lessons learned are the hardest, particularly in venture capital. The deals that we would spend all of our time on, the ones that we were losing money on, as a write-off or not. And in many cases, getting a company from thinking it's going to go out of business and writing it off just to get your money back was just as important as anything where you'd have a 5X on your investment. But you do learn a lot about yourself, you learn a lot about other people, you learn a lot about how to deal with difficult situations. So you have to be very mindful and thoughtful as you go into each new opportunity. What did I learn from the last, mistake, and how do I correct that, and how do we move forward? And I think that, in the venture world, at least from our perspective, it was always about the people. We invested in healthcare, but we tried to invest in the brightest, the best and the brightest, and the people who we felt could navigate through the choppiest of waters. Despite headwinds, despite tough circumstances, are they the type that can, pivot somewhere along the way? And that's really how we based our investment thesis on. And so, yes, so as you translate that discipline into what we do here, these are taxpayer dollars, and they're not my dollars. And just like in our venture business, we had skin in the game too, but over time we were investing other people's money. And you have to have a different lens as you look at things when you're investing other people's money, in this case, taxpayer dollars, And so my antenna goes way up, and my nature is to be, fairly, speculative on, the opportunity. Does it make any sense? I mean, my nature is to go in and think, this is a no until they can convince me this is a yes. And I think that's part of this too, is we think about, we've got about 10 to 12 industry clusters across the state that are deep. And what I mean by that is that you see companies, you have large businesses, global businesses, and sort of this ecosystem of suppliers that's deep within an industry. So we have about a dozen of those that exist. And so we try to lean in and aim toward building upon those industry clusters as we look at companies that want to either come here or expand here. Obviously, they're here, they're expanding, but we have to be, as they're asking for grant dollars and state dollars for incentives, we're evaluating their ability to execute on those plans. Basically, we're providing these dollars as cash, and the good news is we have implemented accountability agreements and clawback provisions. So if they don't, we have the ability to claw either all or a portion of that back.
Which I think is a huge thing, because I think a lot of people read that a company X was given this huge incentive package that is now going to become the burden of the taxpayers.
Right.
When in retrospect, they're having to bring something to the table in order to get those dollars to justify as essentially a business decision for our state.
Oh, it is.
And if they don't hit those hurdles, then there's those clawback provisions to get that money back for the taxpayers.
And oftentimes benchmarks too along the way.
Yeah, we measure all of those things, and we're in communication with the companies all the time, and we generally know where it's going to end. As we see hiring and where their headcount is, as we keep track of all those, there's reporting requirements and all those things. But yeah, you're right, and we measure before we even do a grant. We will measure, whether it's CapEx and or net new jobs. We measure all of that based on the grant and what the ROI is, and on every deal that we look at. So yes, there is a perception that we're just throwing state dollars at projects to get the jobs, and it's a discipline that we've had. We've had it for ever since Bill Haggerty was commissioner of our department. We put in a discipline. We've been perfecting that discipline, but we haven't drastically changed that discipline. In fact, other states have modified their own strategy to look at how we do it, and I think we kind of led in that direction, several decades ago now. But it works, and I'll tell you, when it doesn't work, they're hard conversations to have with companies. But when there's money due back, we issue the letter and we work with them to get paid back. In some cases we've had it all paid back, but in most cases it's usually some pro rata portion of that. But it is. I mean, I think going back to kind of the discipline that it takes in this job, you have to be mindful of what people are telling you, and you have to almost in every case actually. We want to see documentation that they have the ability to pay it back if they're unable to perform. There is that provision as well, and we sometimes, a lot of the entrepreneurs and some of the smaller businesses in Tennessee are like, you don't do it for the smaller businesses because we don't have the balance sheets to pay it back. We're like, yeah, this program's not for you. Yeah. But we have launched Tennessee. There are other programs, both public from a state's perspective, but many private opportunities for entrepreneurs and small business to access capital. But the state of Tennessee is not going to just start providing grants to startups. That's just not in the way we do what we do in economic development.
Let's talk a little bit about how you went from 20 years in the private sector to the public sector. What was it like getting the phone call from then candidate Bill Lee to, hey, will you be my finance chair?
Yeah.
What was that conversation like?
Well, it was interesting. Yeah. So it's funny that you asked that, because we were just talking about this the other day. The governor and I were, but he kind of put together a group of 7 or 8 people, his kitchen cabinet.
Because y'all were friends before he ran, right?
We were friends before all that. In fact, I knew he was thinking about running but beyond just thinking about it, I knew that he was likely going to run, but he hadn't made sort of a decision, the final decision that I'm going to go do it. But we'd had a number of conversations that he was praying about it, thinking about it, felt called to do it. And so many meetings we had. And then once he said, okay, I'm going to do this, but I need a group of people just to bounce ideas off of, and I need to hire a campaign manager, I got to hire a media person, I got to, all these things. And so we show up one morning at a meeting, and we're having that conversation, all those topics, and he kind of says, hey, Stuart, I want you to consider being my finance chair for the campaign. And several others around the table were kind of in on that. And they're like, yes, you'd be great. You should do it. And my first thought was, I could think of at least 3 or 4 other people that should do it, not me. I mean, I know others that have done that before that Governor or Bill, and I'm just not sure it's me. And I asked him to give me a minute to think about it. And I thought about it, and I called him the next day. I said, I don't really think I should do it. I mean, let me help you find that person. He goes, man, you're the only person that I want. I hear what you're saying, but I really want you to do it. I want you to keep thinking about it. So I was like, all right. Anyway, I did it. And, we were, as you all know, we were polling 4 out of 4 early on. Fortunately, the governor could self-fund to a certain degree, but it was, he had to raise the money. And we did everything we possibly could, and with really no outside help from other fundraising types that are out there in our community. We kind of did it on our own and leaned on a lot of friends that we knew early on, and things we did just enough, to make sure that we ran a very good campaign. So, all of a sudden he wins the primary, and that's when we had another conversation about, hey, you need to come do this with me. And I was interested. I had told him my dad had passed away in 2016, so I knew that I wasn't going to continue in our business without my dad. I just felt like that was the missing, component. My partner was gone, so I don't really want to do this alone anymore. So mentally, I'd already decided I'll do something else. I just don't know what. And the timing just lined up for him to invite me to join him. And I thought early on I was going to do what I'm doing now because of what I've done in my private life. But he felt like F&A was where he wanted me to be. And at first I really didn't know a whole lot about what F&A was. And so that's where I landed, obviously, in the first couple of years. But, it's been because of that relationship and because of the trust, I think, that he had in me and me in him, it was important to have somebody, the F&A office is in the Capitol, somebody down the hall. We were in a lot of meetings together, and it was, for him, the last thing that he wanted to be thinking about was the budget. And he had so many other things to focus on. So I just that was my project to take care of in those first year, for definitely the first year and really in the second year, because it was all still so new to all of us. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
One of the things, so you're transitioning out of that, you almost somewhat transitioned into an ECD role and didn't know it, because you were the director of Unified Command for the state's response on COVID.
Right. Which
I think was a catalyst to a lot of people looking at Tennessee saying, that's a state that I want to be in. We saw what happened to the migration numbers coming out of COVID. Matt and I were just doing a podcast several weeks ago with Glenn Jacobs, the Knox County mayor.
Oh, yeah.
And Glenn said, we had a gentleman that came into town, and he was responsible for identifying sites for the CrossFit Games. And he was talking to Glenn, and he said, well, why aren't you wearing a mask right now? And Glenn said, we don't do that here. And the guy was so amazed at Tennessee and the culture that had been created in Tennessee. And he said, we're going to host the CrossFit Games in Knoxville.
Yeah.
And he said, this is a global game.
Global deal,
and they selected Knoxville, Tennessee because of the policies that were in place. Yeah. And I think it just goes to show your leadership, because COVID was one of those things. There wasn't a playbook that you could turn back to and say, this is what you do in this circumstance. You really have to go off your instincts.
You do. Yeah. And so we organized in a way during those early days and weeks of COVID, not knowing what was going on in other states starting to do things. We had some preview of what was going on in other countries because it was much more prevalent in other countries as it was making its way into the United States. And so we had been advised to be thinking differently about how to approach COVID and, the day to day. And so we created this unified command group. And the governor, again, he calls me up. We had a conference call one day, a bunch of people on it. And we said, okay, we're going to create we didn't call it unified command at the time, but we're going to create this COVID group. It's going to be these leaders at agencies. This is how we'll organize it. Great. Nobody talked about who was actually going to run it. And he calls me up after we all hang up on the conference call. He calls me. He's like, hey, I need you to run unified command. I was like, why?
I thought we were friends.
I was like, why me? And he said, well, you're my healthcare guy. And I was like, well, I'm not really a healthcare guy, but just like with all things that he's asked me to do, I did it. And really all I did was I was just the one that was making sure that the trains were all running on time. But the first person that I went out to get was Scott Brower, Special Forces, Fort Campbell, impeccable background, and actually a mutual friend that lives in Clarksville that's very close to Fort Campbell. I called him and I said, hey, we need somebody that has that kind of military discipline. We're dealing with this sort of unknown, invisible enemy. Nobody knows what it is, but we need to think about it in those terms. And he said, I got the guy for you. And so we called Scott, the governor and I called Scott. He shows up literally the next day, and he's agreeing to sort of lead. He was our director of Unified Command. And we assembled a team, and we had other state agency commissioners and other nonprofits that were part of a day, every single day, including Sunday. At every morning, we would go through a discipline. And that was how we sort of went about it. But the governor just, this is where he's just led so well for our state. I mean, he put on the hat of a parent, like as we were thinking about how to do what decisions that had to be made. He was like, what would the mother want us to do? What would the father want us to do? What would the kids of an elderly mother or father want us to do? What would the business owner, large, small, bar owners, how would they want us to be considering these big decisions? And a lot of it was around what's considered an essential business and what's not. And we were pretty flexible on that because we felt like those decisions need to really lie in the hands of those that make those decisions. It shouldn't be the government telling them you should be open or closed, or you should, parks should be open or closed. Those are local decisions. And we allowed, most of the locals to decide how they wanted to do that. We allowed, in our interpretation, we allowed businesses to have a lot of flexibility in what they wanted to do. And quite frankly, we got a lot of pushback on that, but felt like as we came out of COVID, the numbers speak for itself. I mean, we talked about this earlier. I mean, Tennessee came out of COVID better than most states. Right. And a lot of the southern states actually did as well. We were always on the phone with the governors from our bordering states, most of them, about the types of things that we were all thinking about, and we were all thinking along the same lines. And if you think about the economy, post-COVID economy, we had a lot of success in the Southeast, Tennessee included. And of course, it was a devastating disease, and I lost family members to it. I mean, it was rough, and in no way would we ever want that ever again. What I would say is, though, we did develop a discipline with the Unified Command that we've used for other sort of tabletop exercises when you have a disaster or some emergency-related issue with some of the state agencies. We kind of come together and utilize a lot of that Unified Command approach to things, which has worked very well for state government. I mentioned Scott Brower, but Matt Van Epps was actually on that.
Yeah,
I know he was deemed during the campaign as Dr. COVID or whatever it was. But I'll tell you, that guy, he was great. He was part of the team. He was part of really the success of that. That whole effort. But certainly credit to the governor for leading in that way.
So we've kind of got to wrap up here, but I would love, as we wrap up, for you to kind of give your elevator pitch for Tennessee.
Yeah.
What's your pitch to the Fortune 500 CEO that's considering coming to Tennessee?
So there is. I don't know if it's an elevator pitch per se, but I think that most businesses know that Tennessee is a business-friendly state. Whether it's from a tax perspective, no personal income, state income tax, business taxes. We continue to find ways to reduce the business tax across all businesses. Regulatory environment is favorable to businesses. We still have lots of opportunity to make that even more favorable, but those are things that we've been doing for decades, and it's really well positioned us. We have. From a logistics perspective, Tennessee is good at a lot of things, but we happen to be just very lucky in terms of our proximity to the Southeast, the population, access to, 60-70% of the U.S. population within a couple hours. And so all of those things benefit our state. But what a lot of people don't really know about that aren't from Tennessee, I don't think they realize how great the people of Tennessee are and how well we work together collectively. And I'm really speaking from an economic development perspective. From the state, from our federal delegation, we get all of the support from our federal delegation, particularly our two senators. They are pro-business, pro-ECD. Bill Hagerty was in this role. He knows exactly, what we do and how we do it. Marsha Blackburn has been a phenomenal supporter of all the things we're doing, especially in our around innovation and quantum and nuclear. She is a huge fan and proponent of what we're doing in that area. But what it really boils down to is these county mayors, these city mayors, the economic development professionals in those communities that roll up their sleeves and they can tell us what they can do for a project, and they tell us what they need from us to make the project a success. And we all have been, and it's not because of me, it's just been those that have led before me have all had the same success, and all those that had led at the local level has had the same success with these relationships. And that's really what I think is our secret sauce, the X factor, all the things that sometimes many folks can overlook or they don't really understand. But once you get a deal done, and I always ask the question, why Tennessee? We put all these incentives, we did all these things, but why did you choose to come to our state? And every single time they'll say it's the people. We felt welcomed here. This is where we want to do our business. This is the people we want to hire, Tennesseans. We want to raise our family here. And that really is what makes, I think, Tennessee so unique and different than other states.
Absolutely. Well, gosh, I wish we had another hour to go. I know you've got a lot of stuff to go through today. I know everything going on in Oak Ridge with nuclear, and MTSU's doing a lot of stuff that's really pretty amazing right now with quantum.
Yes.
We would love to sit down with you some more and dig into some of those topics. But thank you so much for your service.
Yeah. No, it's been. I appreciate the time to do this, and let's do it again sometime. We do have a lot of interesting things, coming up that we're working on, and we're excited about it.
Yeah, well, Tennessee's a great state, but it's because we have a lot of great people, and you've been at the forefront of that. And so thank you for all your service for our state.
It's been fun. I appreciate it.
So,
thank you.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, make sure you like and subscribe. Give us a comment. We'd love to have your feedback so we can continue to do these in the future. Thanks for joining us today.